Hello, Stitchy friends, it's Shari. Today I have a fun Easter project to share using the Hippity Hop and the Carrot Crop dies. So first I'm going to stitch up my cute little bunny. This is the Hippity Hop die set from Poshta Design, and I've cut all my pieces out here. I am going to be decorating this small basket that I found at Target in the Bullseye Playground section, but any small basket you have will work. Mine just happens to have bunny ears on the back. I also stiffened up a small scrap of patterned cotton fabric with my Terrio Magic, and you can see there I've cut the inserts that go inside the bunny ears. So I have some pink felt, but I also have that patterned fabric, and it's going to look really cute inside the ears. So we're going to start by stitching on the nose and the muzzle of the bunny. Now my bunny is cut from pearl felt because I like that kind of creamy white. I cut the muzzle from Peach Puff, so it's a little bit different in color. And then the nose and all the pink accents on my bunny are cut from Paloma. So first I'm starting with the heart-shaped nose, which I just think is so cute. And it just takes 2 little stitches. And for this whole project, I am stitching with 3 strands of floss. So I did those 2 stitches on the nose, then I tied off, but I'm not cutting my floss just yet. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the details of his little mouth. And I'm just doing a running stitch from the nose over to the right, back to the center. Of course, I went up that vertical stitch that goes up under the nose, and then I'm doing the same on the left side of the mouth. Once I get back to where I started there, I'm just going to tie off again by running my stitch under up to where my tail is and tying off, and now I'll trim my tails. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the center part of his ear onto the ears. So I'm layering on that pattern fabric onto the pink felt, and you just line these up straight with that line on the ear, and I'm going to do a running stitch from the bottom to the top. Now I'm going to tell you right now that I made a mistake that I did not realize I was making at the time, even though I knew before I started this that I needed to hide my knot because the back of the ear is seen. There's not another piece of felt to cover it up. So I just started through the back, stitched all the way up with a running stitch, and now I'm coming down and I'm going to tie it off with a knot, but that knot's going to be on the back. So what I really needed to do was actually start between the white felt and the pink felt and hide my knot. So you can see, we're going to see that knot, but I'm going to show you how I kind of fixed it a little bit. It's still seen, but it's okay because it's on a basket. He's not a two-sided thing too much. So I've done both ears. You can see both of the ears there, just the pink part. I'm going to form them later. And now I'm stitching on the eyes. And this is partly why I used pearl, mostly because I like that color better than the white tundra, but I could use the white tundra for the eyes and they stand out on the pearl. If I had white and white, they really would kind of disappear. So I'm just stitching around the eye with a running stitch. Then I'm going back to where I started and I'll tie it off. And then I will do the same to the other eye. And once I have both of the white parts on there, I'm going to add the color part, which is a sequin, and the pupil, which is a seed bead. So if you saw there, I used the Dreamsicle color story for my blue sequins. I did look at a lot of my blue sequins, and these were the ones I liked the best for this project. So I stitched through the sequin, then through the black bead, then I went back through the sequin and I tied off. And I made sure that I tied a couple knots so that the sequin and this bead stays in place. And now I'm doing the same for the other eye. And you want to kind of make sure that those sequins are down towards the bottom of the eye so that he doesn't look surprised. And you also want them to look nice and even between the two sides. So again, up through the sequin, then the black bead, then back down through the sequin and tie off with a couple knots. So now let's finish assembling our ears. I've already stitched one together. And you take those 2 holes on the left and the right, fold them in to that center hole. And we're going to come up through all the holes, just like this. And we're going to kind of make a figure 8. So in this case, I'm going to kind of wrap around that right side and come back up through that center hole. Then I'm going to wrap around the left side, and I'm going to do this a couple times and then I will tie it off. Now, I did make sure, just for me because I want things to be nice and even, you can see that ear that's laying there. I folded in the right side first, then the left side. On this ear, I did opposite. I folded in the left side first, then the right side, and this way my ears will look like a mirror image of each other. And now I'm tying this off. Now these little tails, they're going to get hidden down inside the top of the bunny's head, so you don't need to worry about hiding those like the pink ones that I kind of forgot. So I'll just keep these tails kind of long. They're just going to get tucked inside the bunny's head. Look at those cute little ears with that fabric. I just think that's an adorable little detail. So now I need to stitch up 2 arms and 2 feet. So I'm starting with my arms. I have 2 layers and I'm coming up between the 2 layers. That's where I'm going to start. Doing my running stitch all the way around. You could get even more decorative and fun and do a blanket stitch here. I think that would be really cute. And then once I get to the end, I'm going to come back with a running stitch, filling all those in. Then I will tie a knot, and this is going to be buried between the 2 layers. Then I'm going to hide my tails up inside the arm. So I'm just threading my needle through that opening at the end of the arm, and then I will trim them off. You don't have to go up the kind of flat area of the arm. That is going to be where we attach it to our bunny. So we have 2 arms, we have 2 ears, now we need 2 feet. And I decided to layer my feet with the pearl on the back, the paloma in the middle, and then his feet are actually shortbread. So I wanted them to look a little bit different than the body of the rabbit. For this thread, I'm actually starting between the back layer, which is the pearl, and the pink layer. And I'm just going to do that same running stitch all the way around this cute little foot. And once I get to where I started, I'll go back in the other direction and fill in those stitches. So here I've just skipped ahead to where I'm filling in the skipped stitches from before. And then when I get to where I started, I'm going to come out between the layers, tie 2 knots that get buried in between those layers, and then I will thread the tails up in there and out the back of the foot. Now you can sew these little feet onto your bunny before you put your bunny body together, but I am actually going to put them on with glue today, which I think is super easy as well. So there's one little foot, and then I just need to make a second one, and you can kind of see how the bunny is coming together, and he is just so adorable. Now before I put my bunny together, I need to finish some stitches on the muzzle to the left and the right of the nose and along the chin, avoiding the sides because those will be stitched when we put the front and the back together. For the muzzle, I am using the floss that matches the bunny, so the floss that matches Pearl, even though the muzzle is cut from Peach Puff, but I thought that the contrast in floss color was kind of nice. So I've started in the middle at the nose, and I'm doing the right side. I've gone to the right, now I'm going back to the nose, and you can see I stopped short of doing the side. I'm actually going to tie this off and start my floss again on the left side and repeat that same process. Go all the way over to where that muzzle kind of hits that little corner at the face and then come back. It's only about 4 or 5 stitches. Then I'll tie this off there as well. And then we're going to jump down to the little chin below his mouth. And because I don't always like having all these knots on the outside edge, I'm starting in the center, going to the right, back to the center, and then I'll go to the left. And he is just looking so cute. I love that little heart nose that he has. So I'll tie this off, and now I'm ready to put my whole bunny rabbit together. So you could really start anywhere on this bunny. I'm going to start right here in the corner under his chin. So that little tail of my floss comes out between the two layers. And I started here so I could get 1 or 2 stitches in before I added in the arm. So now I'm going to add in the arm. I'm going to come up through the back layer, through the first hole in the arm, and try to allow my floss to help me place it in there versus trying to line up all those holes visually. Then I can just make sure my next stitch goes through the arm and then the third stitch. There are only 3 that hold this arm in place. So since we're kind of starting where this arm is, I can kind of open up the 2 pieces of the body and see where my stitches are going. Then I can keep going with my running stitch around my bunny's body. Now I've come over and I've gone around the bottom over to the left, and I want to start putting some stuffing in. And I decided to give a try of keeping my scraps and cutting them into tiny pieces. That's what you see here. So these are my little scraps that I would normally throw away, and I do kind of like this method of keeping them and using them for stuffing. I was worried it would take me forever to cut them into these little pieces, but it really did not. So I'm just stuffing some of these down inside the body now that I've gone around it enough to really kind of hold those. Then I will keep going with my stitching up to the other arm. And you do want to make sure that you, of course, are adding the second arm basically in the same position that you did the first one. So count the holes on the body and make sure they're in the same place. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm pausing, I'm kind of counting my holes, and I am right to where I need to add my next arm. So again, just like I did before, I'm going through the front layer, then through the arm, and then through the back layer, and I will just stitch these 3 stitches that hold this little arm in place. So now I'm kind of back up to the chin, and this was a great opportunity to kind of stick some more stuffing down inside his head and push it through the neck area and make sure his body was nice and stuffed. And I actually really loved using my scraps like this. I always feel bad when I throw away that waste. Now you can see that I did make a point of just keeping the pearl scraps together. So I do have another little jar that has a bunch of colors, but I did not want to run the risk of you seeing any dark colors peeking through if I stuffed the bunny with something other than the white color. So now I'm just stitching around, and this is where I'm going to stitch around those sides of the little muzzle that I left unstitched before. So now his muzzle will be completely filled in, and I've stitched around to where I need to add my ear. This ear is just 1 stitch, so I'm going through the front. I'm going to go through that hole where I did that figure 8 stitch. Then I'm going to go through the hole on the back, and then this will allow me to kind of put the bottom of the ear in there. I can tuck those tails of the floss, and this is where I realized I could see my knot. That's how long it took me to realize I could see my knot, and I should have hidden that pink floss, but it's okay. This is going on a basket, and I am going to kind of secure this with some glue later too. So once that first ear is secure, I'm stitching a couple more stitches around the head. This is again where I figured out, oh, I messed up with the pink, but it's okay. And then I'm figuring out, making sure that I am in the right spot to add my next ear. Again, kind of like the arms, you want to make sure you have them nice and even. You don't want one ear further to one side than the other. So again, I'm going through the front, then through the ear, then through the back, and that'll allow me to kind of tuck those tails, hold it in place, and keep stitching around the head. Now I did make sure that I did a few more stitches after this ear to kind of secure it and get things nice and tight before I stuffed the head with those little felt pieces. So now we're ready to pour some of this felt into his head and stuff his head too. And once I get that stuffed as much as I want, I can continue my stitching and finish closing up my little bunny rabbit. I feel like this is a lot easier to work with than the polyfill, which kind of has a lot of bounce to it and poofs back out. This, I feel like you can kind of squish it down a little more and get it to look the way you want. You want to be careful of those ears there. I kept catching them with my floss, and I decided I wanted a little more in here. I still have a little hole to stuff in. I also think that this is a lot easier to stuff in a small hole than polyfill is as well. And then I can get back to where I started right there in that kind of little corner under his chin. And now I am ready to go back the other direction. And I do want to make sure I go under his little muzzle because I don't want my color kind of crossing over. I know it's the same color, but I don't like that extra little stitch there. I want it to be hidden underneath that muzzle piece of felt. So here you see I'm going back in the other direction around my bunny rabbit, and I'll just complete him and tie off those tails and hide them inside. Now, I am kind of sad that because my project is on a basket, I don't get to put a little cute tail on him. But if you were making him just by himself, I think a cute little pom-pom tail would be adorable. There's also a die in the set that allows you to stitch on a little tail in a contrasting color as well. So now all those tails of the floss are hidden, and here is my cute little bunny. And now I need to add his feet. So here are my pieces of my floss that I should have hidden. I'm going to add some glue to those so that they're secure and they don't come undone. So I have a little bit of tacky glue here. I'm going to squirt some out just onto a scrap piece of paper. I also have a toothpick, and I'm going to pick a little bit of it up and just kind of manipulate those flosses to go up beside my stitch line so they're not sticking out on both sides. And the glue will dry and hold everything in place and really secure that knot. So there's no chance of it coming undone. Now, depending on the size of your basket, this might be completely hidden. My basket was short. It was about the height of my bunny, so the ears really stuck up above the edge. And I'll just sit him over here. I'm going to prop him up so that the back of his ears don't touch my desk. And then I'm adding a little bit of that glue to his body down here at the bottom, and that is where his little feet are going to go. And look how cute he is. He's so adorable. This is the first time I've stitched him up, and I don't know why I've waited so long. Now, he had some accessories. There is an Easter egg that is super cute and tiny, and there's this carrot. And I really wanted to stitch up the carrot. It has this really fun piece for the top that you fold in half, and then you stitch between the orange layers. Now, I should have put my floss between the two layers of green, and I didn't, but I'll fix that at the end. And that's just so my knot could get completely hidden down the center. So you want to stitch through the green and then through the orange, and it lines up with those 3 holes on the top of the carrot shape. And I just think this is a really fun little detail with that kind of fringe, I guess you should say, folded fringe topper to the carrot. I just think that's really fun. So for my carrot, I believe I used Monarch for the orange, but I'm using a lighter contrasting orange floss to stitch around it, and the topper is Limelight. Now here is where I realized I should have had this between the 2 parts of green, so I'm just going to pull my floss so it comes out between the green. And then once I have that out there, I can tie off and my knot will be hidden right in the center of the carrot versus between the green and the orange. It'll be between the green. Hopefully that makes sense. So now I've pulled my ending floss through the 2 greens and I can hide my knot down inside that fluffy green topper. So I'll just thread my needle through, then out through the carrot, and I can trim off the end. And now I have this cute, cute little carrot. You could make a whole bunch of these and make a whole carrot patch if you wanted. I am just going to put this in my bunny's hand. And I'm not going to do it just yet. I'm going to wait till I put him on his basket. Now I wanted some grass to go on both sides of my bunny. So I am actually using the little fringe die from the Smiling Scarecrow die set. And I've cut this from some Limelight. This makes some perfect little grass, but I don't want those little holes just to remain open. So I'm going back and forth with a running stitch through the holes just so they have a stitching detail on them. I'll tie them off on the back, and then those knots will get hidden when I adhere these to my basket. You could even gather this up if you wanted and make some really floofy grass, but I am just going to glue it right onto the basket. So let's add the bunny. I'm using that same tacky glue. So I've just put a line down the basket right there where it kind of sticks out the most, and my little bunny can go right there in the middle. So back to my grass, this is where I'm going to tie the knot on the back side. So I just looped my floss around to the back side. I'm looping it through itself, and then I will tie it off into a knot. Making sure it's nice and tight. Then I'll just trim the ends of the tail. Now all this is going to get hidden and glued down, so you don't need to worry too much about your tails showing because they're going to get hidden behind. So I'll do the same thing to the other side. And this is really just to tie those off so that we can hide them. And I'll do it to both pieces of grass. Then I'm adding my line of glue right where I want my grass to go. And then this fits perfectly right in there. I love how it kind of goes with the shape of the basket. And then we'll just do the same thing to the piece of grass for the other side. And this is where I'm going to add my little carrot to my bunny's hand. So here's my other piece of grass. I've tied off my floss on the back of it, and I can just add this to the other side. The really nice thing about this idea too is both of your pieces of grass are exactly the same length because you used a die to create them. And then there is our finished basket. I just think it's so cute. I did add a little more glue behind him, and then I actually kind of put him flat down on my desk while he dried so that his feet stuck down really well. So now let's make something to go in our basket. I thought it would be fun to take the carrot crop die. Now this coordinates with the scissor keeper. So you cut the scissor keeper and then the carrot crop die cuts those little stitching details. And you also get the die for the topper. Now I've cut the stitching details into my darker orange, and then I have a solid piece of lighter orange, and that's going to be the inside, which I'm going to explain here in just a minute. But first, I'm going to do all the stitching on my topper. So you stitch in the center or the vein lines of the leaves, and then I'm going to stitch around. I'm not worrying about those stitches along the bottom. Those are where we're going to connect this to the carrot. So I stitched that first line down the center, running stitch up to the top, then back down, and then I tied it off between so that my knot can be hidden inside. Then I'm doing the same for the other two kind of veins of the leaf. And I don't have enough floss to keep going all the way around, so I'm going to thread my tails up through and trim them off so they're nice and hidden. And then I'll stitch around this leaf that goes at the top of our carrot. So I'm going to skip ahead so you don't have to see me do all those stitches, but just like the other ones, I'm tying this off between the two layers of green, and then I will hide my tails up inside. So my topper is all done, and then I'm moving on to the carrot. Now you want to stitch these detail lines first before you put your carrot together. And I decided to use a slightly lighter orange color and do a chain stitch so that they stood out really nicely. So that's what I'm doing here is I'm doing a chain stitch, and I'm just going to go through and do all of these little lines on the front and the back of the carrot. And I did decide on most of them not to go all the way to the outside edge. So I was kind of looking at it here, and I did do the stitch all the way to the edge, but decided I didn't like that. So I'm going to take that out and I'm going to stop short. There are a couple of these lines that are very short, and you do need to take them all the way to the edge because there's only one stitch otherwise. But you can kind of decide on what look you want. And I did tie off mostly after every line, but not always. In this case, because my tail is at the other side, I like to kind of run my floss underneath the back of the stitches and get them both over to the same spot before I tie my knot. So I'm going to skip ahead. I've done all those chain stitches. Normally you would just put these two carrots together, put the topper on, and stuff it. But I wanted to make a little treat pouch that kind of acted just like our scissor keeper. So we need to line it with a different felt that doesn't have those detail stitches. So to do this, I have my darker piece with the details on the outside and a lighter piece of felt on the inside without the detail pieces. I have that for the front and for the back, and I'm just going to line all four of them up, and I'm going to start my floss between those two liner pieces. And I'm just going to do a running stitch through all four of these pieces of felt, all the way down one side to the point. Then I'm going to turn around the point, back up the other side with my running stitch, and then I'll come back and tie off. And I felt like this was the easiest way to get these two pieces together without that topper in the way, and then I will add the topper and stitch the top two separately. Now you could stitch that top line separate if you wanted. I've gotten over to the other side, I'm going back here. And then, like I said, you could stitch the top before you do this if you wanted. It really doesn't matter, just whichever way you find to be easiest. So once I'm back to where I started, I am going to thread my needle through and come out in between those two liner pieces of felt and tie my knot. Now what I'm actually doing here is taking my needle and I'm running my thread so it comes out between the outside dark piece and the inside lighter piece so that my tail can be hidden between those two layers. Then I'll do the same thing with this one. So I'm taking that stitch so it comes out between those two layers, and then I'll hide it between the two. So this is open, so it's really easy to kind of stick it down in there and hide it between those two layers. So there is my pocket, and now I need to stitch across that kind of top arch. And I actually stitched the front side first. And to do these, you're going to want to go between the dark layer and the inner layer, so your tail comes out between them. And I just started one stitch in so that my knot wasn't right on that little corner edge that we have there. So I took my stitch to that outside edge, and now I'm going to go back to the left with my running stitch all the way across. Then I'll come back to where I started and tie my knot and hide it between that outer layer and the inner layer of this front panel. So this I've gone all the way across. Now I'm going back. And now I'm back to where I started and I'm ready to tie that knot. So you want to come out in between those two layers and tie your knot so it's hidden. And this time we're going to do just like we normally do and thread that needle between the layers and out to hide our tails. So this will finish off the front of our little pouch, and then we can move on to the back, and this is where we're going to attach our little greenery to the top. So luckily this greenery is in the center, so I can start my stitching on one side just like I did before, get all the way over the center and then place it. Now there are 5 little holes on this that line up with the holes on the top of the carrot, and there is one little extra hole to show you where the center is. So you can see those 5 holes there, and I'm just kind of doing just like I did with the arms of the bunny and just using my floss as I thread through those holes to line up that carrot top with the carrot. Then I'll just keep stitching all the way over to the other edge and then turn back and finish my running stitch the other direction back to where I started. And just like on the front, I'm going to come out in between the 2 layers of that back panel, tie my knot so it's hidden between that dark felt and the light felt, and then run my tails through and out and trim them. And now we have a cute little pouch to fill with goodies. I've got some little chocolate rabbits here. I had some gold coins. Then for the basket, I filled it with some grass, obviously, and then we can add all our goodies to the basket. So we have our carrot pouch and some other yummy little things like an Easter Reese's egg, some little carrot treat boxes. But here is that finished Easter basket with the Hippity Hop bunny, which I just think is so cute, and then a fun idea for the carrot crop die. Thank you so much for watching today and happy stitching! Bye!